For the first time in human history, civilizations, cultures, and groups are compelled to relate to one another on a constant and continuous basis. Yet mutual ignorance exacerbated by mutual suspicion and hostility inhibits them from establishing ties that endure and flourish. Dialogue and mutual understandings are the prerequisites for building just and equitable relations between cultures and civilizations. Dialogue of Civilization, DOC, could help strengthen relationships and improve understanding regarding the fundamental principles and practices of various communities. Due to the fact that DOC was fast becoming a much-needed mechanism for discoursing issues that arise from the inevitable encounter between nations, ethnic groups, faith systems, ideologies, worldviews, and cultures, on the 13th of November 1996, the Universiti Malaya Centre for Civilisational Dialogue, UMCCD, was established.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm very welcoming to all of you. Thank you for joining this forum, Rethinking Poverty and Economic Development in the context of the pandemic and natural disaster-prone era. Now, before we start our forum, I would like to call upon Prof. Dr. Azizan Baharudin, Director of the Universiti Malaya Centre for Civilisational Dialogue and shareholder of UKM YSD Chair for Sustainability, to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much, Saudara Ahmad, Project Manager at UMCCD. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrahli sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Yang berbahagia Profesor Rohana Jani, Acting Director of the Ungku Aziz Centre for Development Studies, Universiti Malaya, and all members of the Centre. Yang berbahagia Profesor Dr. Fatimah Kari, Research Advisor of the Universiti Malaya Centre for Civilisational Dialogue. Esteemed speakers of our forum today, Dr.Vivi Alatas, Dr. Haniza Khalid, Puan Hawati Abdul Hamid, respected academicians, policymakers, community leaders, members of the press, and everyone present. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be with you and a very, very good morning to all of us. Welcome to our webinar today, which is entitled Rethinking Poverty and Economic Development in the Context of the Pandemic and Natural Disaster-Prone Area. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, zero poverty is Sustainable Development Goal number 1. Indeed, poverty is a human condition that acts against the thriving and sustainability of any civilization, most critically of the current civilization, human civilization. And this is especially important now, post-pandemic era. We're not quite outside of the pandemic as yet, so we are told. And also in this era of critical climate change. So because of the brevity of the condition, there is so much we need to do. And for example, we need to understand many elements and dimensions of poverty itself. And of course, its opposite, wealth. I think it's not fair to just speak about poverty and when we don't speak about wealth, when we don't look at wealth. So I think overall, the philosophy behind of our conversation is to unpack these two words, these two concepts. Yeah? Is it possible that we look at poverty and wealth in a slightly different light? And one of the very important area regarding poverty that we need to look at, we need to understand and tidy up perhaps is the meaning of poverty and the means of measuring it, right, Fatima? How do we measure this poverty, especially in the post-pandemic era, as also in the era of the disasters that we are facing. Certainly, our perceptions and strategies and actions, I think, will depend very much on the poverty indices, index that we choose to employ. What do the indexes or indices show? And perhaps more importantly, what do they hide? So today, the UMCCD, together with the UAC for Development Studies, are taking the initiative to start us thinking and perhaps acting towards a more apt and satisfactory method of measuring poverty. And before we begin, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today, Professor Fatimah Kari. She earned her bachelor's degree from the National University of Malaysia, UKM, her Masters of Economics from University of Leicester in UK, and her PhD in Economics from the MSU, United States of America. She is formerly the Director of the Center for Poverty and Development Studies, Universiti Malaya, and she has published and presented many scholarly papers in the area of subsidy in agriculture sector, climate change and environment, poverty indexing, and adoption of green technology. So maybe in the context of the last expertise area that we've spoken about, she will dwell upon she will inform the meeting today of her ideas and thoughts. She has been a consultant for several consultancy projects sponsored by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, as well as the Economic Planning Unit, Prime Minister's Department. So currently she is the research advisor at our center and a member of the Sarawak Economic Action Council. So Prof, without further ado, the floor is yours. Please introduce our esteemed speakers and do your stuff, Prof.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Datuk Prof. Azizan. I mean, you have been very instrumental. I would have to admit that you have been instrumental in my career as far as my career history is concerned. There's so much I have learned from you, especially in terms of dealing with the humanity in the area that I'm working in. Again, I would like to thank you for giving me this space to launch and to also be involved in this seminar, in this webinar today. I think without your help and without your dua, it would not be possible at all to sort of launch the event today. Now, let me just take a few minutes of our time to do some reflection. I think the last 2.5 years, looking back, we have seen a very unprecedented global crisis in modern history, right? The impact is broad and deep, both in terms of job loss, life loss, and income reversal. I was just talking to one of my colleagues the other day. I was thinking, could it be possible that this type of a crisis will force us to rewrite economics in a truly different way as it is from now, because whatever is done before the pandemic may not be applicable at all after the post-pandemic. So I leave it the challenge to the Department of Economics, my previous department at the faculty, to think about it. Now, in retrospect, upon reflection, as an economist myself, there are a few things that I have observed as what has happened in the last 2.5 years. When the pandemic struck us in early March 2020, and how we respond toward it, and then the policy responded toward it. Basically, we can sense a lot of similarities across the board, across country and across region. I think many of us as an economist do agree that it is a covariate shock. When you talk about a covariate shock, economists tend to define it more in terms of a general disequilibrium, more of in terms of across the board type of shock and disruption across the economy. So it would be quite interesting to look at how the policy responds towards a covariate shock as opposed to a partial type of shock into the system. Then the other thing that I do notice before I hand over the mic to the three experts will be our policy response has been fairly similar in the sense that the pandemic, the crisis is very severe and is immediate in effect in nature. So you look at how the government responds, how the policy responds, it is quite common, in which the unconditional emergence of cash transfer and the support, right, system, fiscal support system among the employees, in which you're talking about subsidy, wage subsidy, support in terms of jobs have been launched all across the board and across sector and across the globe and all the regions. So that is the second similarities that we have seen over the last 2.5 years. And the last across the board is really the fiscal stimulus that has been introduced by any government. Actually, at the end of the day, we just reflect how fragile and how sensitive and how weak, I would say, how weak in terms of the social protection policies and social safety net, and also all the informal sectors in the country. So basically, economists are looking at how does the fiscal system, fiscal support work, but that is also a reflection how weak the existing structure in terms of our social protection system. So we do look at it, and like Dr. Prof have mentioned, it is high time for us to look at how we define poverty, and also don't forget the other side of it, and how do we define wealth in this situation. Now, I know in the interest of time, indeed today we are fortunate enough to have three economists as our panelists. They happen to be all female economists, not by design, just by coincidence that they are willing to come on board for the day for today's event. Now, before I sort of give the virtual platform to all the three panelists, may I take the liberty to introduce the three panelists? Dr. Vivi Alatas is still somewhere. She'll be joining us shortly. Dr. Vivi Alatas is not new to Universiti Malaya. She has been our supporter all along in terms of our seminar and conferences. Dr. Alatas, an economist with passion in evidence-based solution. Currently, she is the CEO of Asia Creativita, a consulting firm and EdTech in Jakarta. Formerly, she was a lead economist of the World Bank, where she led a team of seasoned local and international economists in producing several flagship reports for national and global audience, including Targeting Poor and Vulnerable Households in Indonesia, Making Poverty Work in Indonesia, Indonesia Rising Divide, Indonesia Job Report, and Aspiring Indonesia, Expanding the Middle Class. She presented various reports and research findings to the President, Vice President, Minister, and Deputy Minister. She has also written several journal papers on poverty, inequality, and labor issues. Some of the papers were written in collaboration with Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee and Agnes Deaton, who was also her advisor at Princeton University. So we are indeed very lucky because Dr. Alatas will be with us shortly to be one of the panelists. Our second speaker for the day is Dr. Haniza Khalid, a senior development economist at UNDP Malaysia. In this regard, right, we have to acknowledge the role of UNDP in terms of our own development strategies. I think UNDP is very much related to the SDG goals, and in which it is already fully incorporated in our development planning. I mean, alhamdulillah for that, because otherwise we'll not be able to see some of the specific framework and some of the specific objectives. So UNDP has always been associated with the introduction and also the operational part of the SDG goals that we are having now. In terms of professional career, Dr. Haniza Khalid served as a senior development economist for UNDP, for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. Upon joining the organization in 2019, she brings more than 20 years of experience and research from the academia, and prior to that, she worked in the Central Bank of Malaysia. She has been involved in a number of policy studies for the federal and state government, mainly on poverty and livelihood of the vulnerable, as well as broader aspect development planning and finance. Her current interests include role of institution in influencing economic empowerment in different vulnerable groups, and impact of policies and financing on sustainable development. Haniza holds a doctoral degree in economics, another emerging economist from the country, of course, from the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. Welcome and thank you, Dr. Haniza. The third speaker, Hawati Abdul Hamid, is the Deputy Director of Research at Khazanah Research Institution. I think everybody knows the fact that Khazanah Research Institution has been very instrumental in influencing some of our policy design and also policy framework in this country. And we are quite lucky because Khazanah has played that very strategic role to look and to move toward an evidence-based type of research with a lot of support in terms of data, with a lot of support in terms of the expert in the area. So Hawati currently is the Deputy Director for Khazanah Research at the Institute. She worked on socioeconomic issues such as poverty and inequality, social mobility and social protection. Prior to joining Khazanah, she worked at the Security Commission Malaysia, University Technology UiTM, and the National News Agency Malaysia. Hawati holds a master's degree in International Development Studies from the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo, Japan, an executive MBA from University Technology Mara. She obtained her BA honors in economics with computing. I find that quite interesting, you know, combining economics and computing. I think that should be the way ahead in terms of how economics and technology should blend in. She obtained her BA in economic and computing from the University of Kent and United Kingdom. All the three panelists bring with them the expert, their work, and also their understanding of the subject matter. Now, Dr. Alatas is supposed to present as the first panelist, but she still have some other personal obligation at the moment. She'll be with us in under 20 minutes. So without further ado, may I call upon Dr. Haniza Khalid to present your slides, and the time given will be about 20 minutes. Dr. Haniza, right?
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning. Thank you so much to the Center for Civilisational Dialogue for inviting us, giving us a chance to participate in this very important conversation. This is indeed, after 2 years, and as the economy is opening, it's actually a very timely opportunity to assess where we are going forward in our poverty eradication, as well as and being part of that, integral to that is poverty measurement. So I've been specifically asked by the organizer to focus on MPI, which I will try to do. So I will try to do justice to that request. May I share screen? Yeah, start sharing screen. So the Multidimensional Poverty Index is actually one of the two key poverty measurements or development index that UNDP, UN system has introduced. One, of course, the other one is the Human Development Index, which we produce the reports through the Human Development Report every year. So the Multidimensional Poverty Index is now published separately by OP, the Oxford Centre Poverty, and also by mainly by them, but still the cooperation between NDP and OP is sustained. So the first MPI came about around early 2010, early in the decade. Malaysia's first poverty index came out in 2014. Basically, the index, I'm sure everyone knows, I'm just reintroducing the concepts here, is to go beyond income as a monetary measure of poverty to look into other outcomes that reflect poverty. They are not the reason for poverty, but they are outcomes. So these dimensions of poverty, that the manifestation of whatever deprivation a household is facing, these three dimensions are health, education, and standard of living. Standard of living is basically just showing the basic consumption basket that a family will have for a decent, sort of a decent livelihood status. So the nationally adjusted MPI is, as you know, quite different from the global MPI, and primarily because of the addition of the income component. Around 20 plus countries, not many countries actually have income in their MPI. And then the education indicators, and of course, thereafter the cutoff are different. Health indicators also different. Standard of living is also being adjusted. Nonetheless, what we can see from 2014, 2016, and 2019 is that the incidence and the head count, as well as the intensity, has been rather low for the Malaysian, based on the Malaysian data, they have been rather low. And we also note that the reporting of the MPI is very much an aggregated reporting. As such, there's really very little policy implication or policy adjustments that has been initiated through the reports. So it is very important for us to use our poverty data for action. They are not just data for the sake of data, and we are trying to support any changes in this direction. And inshallah, this will be, you know, the end game of any poverty matrices or measurement exercises. Even though the data is aggregated, we can have rural and urban, but we need more disaggregation of data. So why is MPI important? Because as a complement to the poverty, the monetary measure, the MPI is much richer in terms of telling us the story of the poor. So we know the head count, not the head count, as well as the intensity of poverty. So the intensity of poverty in respect to education, health, and standard of living, not just the income gap or the poverty gap that we are used to under monetary poverty measures. In terms of the SDG, the MPI feels a reporting gap in the SDGs is used to report progress towards SDG target 1.2, reducing poverty in all its dimensions. So there's one target 1.2, which is specifically, but as we tailor our MPIs to national context, our SDG priorities, our draft nation plan, our constitution, civil society, channeling or telling us what are the needs of the people and so on. So these national indicators can be used to track progress in other SDGs, specifically on SDG 2, 3 on health and education, and then 6 on urban, 7 on economic inequality, and so on. So the potential for MPI to guide our policy making as well as resource allocation is immense. The MPI can make visible the effectiveness of government policies. In contrast, monetary poverty measures will not be able to directly reflect social policy. And when we use MPI, it is not an activity based, as I mentioned before, it's more an outcome based. So it's not just the effect of social policy as in social protection, but also social infrastructure. Because some of the deprivations are not just because of lack of money or lack of access, but also social capital discrimination, physical constraints, spatial constraints, and due to other factors. So the government must dig a bit deeper to see the roots of the deprivations and what are the pathways to resolve them. The MPI just gives you a snapshot of what's there. So as mentioned before, it would be very good if we can disaggregate it, because even using the current set of dimensions and indicators, more information can be revealed through disaggregation of population subgroups or spatial subgroups. We can see who is the poorest and whether they are catching up. And this is very important, very integral to the leave no one behind philosophy of sustainable development. You can see poverty from various points of view, from the climate point of view, as I will try to elaborate on further, from the spatial vulnerability, which is linked to environment, from social vulnerability linked to access, and also government's policy and resource allocation, where we have concentration of good physical and social infrastructure, and where you have less physical and social and physical infrastructure. In many countries, we've seen the success of MPI being used for coordinated actions. MPI is not a tool to punish any particular ministry or parliamentarian, if their constituency happen to have the lowest MPI and so on. So it's not the purpose, it's not how you can use MPI. It should be able to guide coordinated actions, because health education is not the responsibility of one ministry. It is so the enabling framework, the sufficient but the necessary but not sufficient conditions, like we discussed in economics a lot, market failure issues. So all these require actions by several ministries, by grassroots leadership, and but it provides a clear end game at the end of the day, and also give us a monitoring and accountability tool within the government and actually within the society itself. So UNDP is working towards proposing already proposed MPI review to EPU, Bahagian Equity Division, that we think the review will benefit poverty measurement in Malaysia in terms of capturing non-income dimensions of poverty better. So the changes or the adjustments or the incremental changes, maybe some changes could be phased out, and also to reflect whatever backsliding that we have faced due to COVID, and also current economic challenges from abroad. Dimensions, adjustment can be in the dimensions, it can be in the indicators and the proxies used for the indicators, in the thresholds and weightage, and we can even have unique MPIs for unique vulnerable societies or locations, where instead of comparing it across the country, we can compare it over time. So there's a clear improvement within that unique group or subgroup of people or place. The end result of this MPI review project is to generate a basic consensus on the issues and priorities, and this will guide MPI revision. And to do this, it must be country-owned, it must be collaborative, not just from because MPI is a national aggregate measures, right? So it must be able to reflect sufficiently at key challenges. It might not capture or pick up small challenges or unique challenges to different societies, but general challenges must be reflected contemporarily, as well as the MPI must be also future-proof. That means this MPI, the measures that we end up with must be able to stand the test of time. You can't have MPI revision every 5 years or every 3 years. You must have a certain kind of historical length and validity for us to make comparisons over time and over policies, policy frameworks. So using poverty data going forward, and of course, taking into account COVID-19 and also climate change, the MPI will not replace PLI or other poverty measurements, but it will be a valuable tool for policymakers for a more holistic view on poverty, going beyond income and going beyond head counts. Because the MPI allows us to do intensity measurement, and we are able to play around with the indicators threshold. We can have different thresholds at different for different groups or different circumstances. But as have been mentioned many times, the MPI give us this rich set of data. How many are poor and how are they poor? So the extent and intensity of poverty, where are the poor? Where are the concentration of the poor? Why are they poor? So understanding the dimension and the causes which we dig further, we can understand why they are poor. And what are the current and future challenges? For example, digital divide, will it become a new source of deprivation? Climate change, how do we incorporate climate change as a new source of deprivation? So these are things that we are excited to look at if when the new MPI revision comes takes off. So the global experience, whether in China or Colombia, the MPI is already used by senior policymakers to coordinate policy and to understand and track the impact of the policies on the poor, helping to break down silos, as we mentioned just now, integrated public policy, and also to intensify policy impact. And in the case of developing countries, there's also a huge contribution in terms of minimizing resources for the same intention or the same target group. I will stop here. Maybe in my second round of intervention, we'll focus on MPI and COVID-19 as well as the environment policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Haniza, for the presentation. I am very sure we'll be listening to a lot more on the second part of the presentation. I think in the interest of time, we just proceed to invite Hawati Abdul Hamid, since we are still waiting for Dr.Vivi Alatas to come on board. So without further ado, may I call upon Dr. Hawati to do her presentation? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Let me first share my screen. Okay, firstly, I would like to thank to the organizer for inviting me today to be part of this discussion and dialogues. I feel very honored to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to also learn from the other panelists as well as from the audience later on. So probably before we start, maybe if I can just mention that in KRI, as mentioned just now, I work on the issue of poverty and equality, but more recently, I work on my recent report is on social protection. So probably you can expect that this presentation will be geared more towards the role of social protection in preventing poverty and addressing vulnerability, especially in the context of that what we are interested to discuss today in terms of the COVID shocks. So I plan to cover my presentation into 3 parts. First, given the topic or the title formulated by the organizer, it stated that rethinking poverty. So I would like to unpack slightly on my thinking probably about this particular phenomena that we call poverty. And then secondly, I would like to highlight the role of social protection in shock responsiveness and how our existing social protection system can be adapted to respond to shock. And thirdly, I would like to talk briefly on the challenges of incorporating shock responsiveness into our current social protection system. What would be the challenges? Okay, so to move on, right. Okay, so given the fact that we were talking about the context of poverty and how we should rethink, it is framed as rethinking of poverty, I think there have been a lot of thoughts being given on poverty, and I do acknowledge the problem of poverty, and I feel that this is a real problem affecting the lives of people. But what I like to bring up in this short discussion is in terms of the poverty measurement. Why there has been so much focus on poverty management. Dr. Haniza just now discussed about multidimensional poverty that try to drive conversation slightly away from income centric measurement of poverty, but at the same time we know that we have other indicators that try to measure poverty in terms of absolute poverty, relative poverty, and then when we are looking in terms of household, some people attempt to rank, try to implement or use equivalent scale to rank household due to the heterogeneity in terms of the household size, where the location they reside, in order to rank them and to really identify who are the poorest among the poor, right? So and these essentially have this the why we are doing this is really to it relates to the way we want to respond to address poverty, where we want to target the exact poor that should be receiving or should be assisting. And then this measurement of poverty really emerged in the early 1980s, where if you notice in the literature, there have been burgeoning literature that focus on how to measure poverty. But of course, prior to that, there are some techniques that we try to measure poverty, but I think it's really in the 80s and 90s that there have been a lot of discussion on how we want to measure. But and I think this is really ties to the thinking of poverty reduction strategy, that we want to target the specific recipient that should be given assistance, probably against the backdrop of fiscal constraint, limited resources, and so on and so forth. And I think it is no coincidence that this poverty targeting and measurement of poverty risen because of also the rise of neoliberalism that try to the epoch of the idea of free market, removing government interference, right, to deregulate and let those who can pay get the social services that they need from the market, and then the government can concentrate on the poorest of the poor that we were talking just now. So and then I do find that it is useful to measure poverty for several reasons. For example, we need to measure poverty to keep the issue of poverty in the political and economic agenda. We need to understand the pattern of poverty in terms of regional. I mean, in Malaysia, we have a lot of regional disparity, gender disparity, and so on and so forth. And we also need to track progress. Hence why we need a measure to see the effort, what have been the progress or the outcome of the effort that we have put in to reduce poverty. But as I mentioned just now, more importantly, accurate poverty targeting requires accurate poverty measurement. Hence why I think poverty management has been something that is critical in this conversation. Otherwise, justification for targeting does not hold. But at the same time, I also want to highlight that in the context of really, a true sense of overcoming poverty, I think we need to have a bit of, there have been a thinking, but probably we need also to acknowledge that poverty targeting alone is not enough to guide policy that attempt to reduce poverty and vulnerability. For example, with respect to absolute poverty, we try to be as objective as possible in identifying the basket of goods, but really what comprised in the basket is also a subjective decision that have to be taken by the people who are trying to come up with the most relevant poverty line income. And in the case of relative poverty, usually we look in terms of the people who live half of median income, for example. But in the context of Malaysia, probably what is more that we know more is the B40 demarcation, whereby we cut people based on the income distribution at B40 income threshold in order to identify who's supposed to get assistance. But really, this income cut off, or that decision of what should be the poverty line, is also quite subjective. I mean, in one of the study that we did by looking at this demarcation of household B40, M40, and T20, we tried to look against the consumption. What does it mean when people have certain incomes and they fall in B40? What do they really consume? But it turned out that it's not just restricted to that B40 alone that probably have similar vulnerability. People who are living slightly above B40, when we take into account their household size, their dependents, where they live, some of them can be classified as vulnerable or quote unquote B40 group, and yet because of that rudimentary demarcation, probably they are not entitled or eligible for assistance. So and also I think we also have to realize that what is our underlying assumption about poverty. Poverty can be fixed or static. If that is the case, if we can if the poor is always a specific group, then it can be more straightforward to identify them. For example, those who are disabled or who are bedridden, they are not able to work. Probably they will be that this is quite a static group in the poverty targeting. But then people, we need to acknowledge also that people move in and out from poverty, which means that we also need to continuously identify or monitor who have fallen or who have gone out of that poverty. So what the point that I'm trying to say here, that in order, I'm trying to come up with this paradigm shift, that in addition to try to basmi kemiskinan by targeting the poor itself, we also need to have this forward-looking approach in actually building a system that provide a buffer or what we call this, some people call this social safety net, that will come in immediately when they face or they risk crystallize, or for example, if they lose job, then they will immediately, assistance can be immediately extended if they are part of a social protection system already. So so the few paradigm shift that we are trying to call in our recent work on social protection is we are trying to advocate this forward-looking approach in the way we want to prevent, in a way we want to address poverty, by actually looking at the risk instead of directly target trying to find who is the poor. And then then we can actually rely on certain established international convention that have already identified the core life cycle risks that we can adopt, which I think I will cover slightly earlier, that we have made a lot of progress in this. And then finally we also need to build a shock resistant system, and not reactive, in the sense that just try to address an issue by coming out with a short-term relief program, because it can be less sustainable using that approach. So Prof. Fatima just now mentioned about covariate risk. So this is something that I also would like to discuss a bit today. Now let's look a little bit more on the nature of the shock, because I mentioned just now, in order for us to have this forward-looking approach, we need to, rather than target who is the poor, we might want to look at the underlying factor that result of making people falling into poverty. And then these risks can be divided into two types of risks. First, I think Prof. Fatima just now used semi-covariate shocks, if I'm not wrong. But here I would like to use this idiosyncratic risk that includes the various shock and crises affecting individuals and families across their life cycle. So this risk very much happening at individual level or at family level. But the covariate risk normally affect, it refers to catastrophe that affect the entire community or population at the same time. This is where what we are referring today as highlighted in the title of our discussion today, in the era of prone natural pandemic and natural disaster prone era, right? So you can think of this covariate shock to include things like COVID, as well as things like our recent experience with the flood, other natural disaster catastrophes. And then now, I would like to highlight that social protection can actually build a resilient to idiosyncratic risk across life cycle, and that we know that if we, for example, with KRI, we are trying to advocate for this social what we call life cycle approach to social protection by ensuring that everyone be part of the social protection system, and this social protection floor can be extended to them when a certain risks materialize. But at the same time, social protection can also provide protection that cut across life cycle of population, and this is the covariate risk that I mentioned just now, which can include economic downturn, natural disaster, political and conflict related crisis, and public health crisis such as COVID-19, Ebola, and SARS. But really the condition is really to build a system that can at least try to capture or make everyone, try to develop an inclusive social protection that include everyone in the system. And in our context, we are looking at the childhood risk, the old age risk, but at the same time, the risk that the working age population are facing during the working age period. But really, during this period, there are a lot of risks that we can come up with. But probably we want to be a bit more focused, and this is where international convention is useful, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that we should provide social security protection for at least core life cycle risks such as injuries, unemployment, sickness, and invalidity. And I think Malaysia have, to be fair, Malaysia has made a lot of progress in this with the existence of at least two key national social institutions, which I'm referring to SOCSO and EPF, where a long-term scheme have been established. But while this is the case, the coverage is really an issue. If you look at it, for the working age population, we estimated that around 40% of our working population, this is just working, our labor force, are not part of these social security schemes. But if we extend a bit the denominator into working age population that is residing outside the labor force, this proportion could increase to 60%, meaning that there are still a lot more people who are not covered under this social protection system. So this is something that will become a challenge, particularly, we manifested this during the COVID, how we've faced a bit of hiccup in terms of reaching those working age in the formal sector, for example. And then if you're interested, you probably want to have a look at our report where really we were trying to advocate social protection floor that leave no one behind. And we are suggesting that at least these three major population groups should be bucketed into this major population group, and targeting the childhood risk, old age risk, as well as unemployment risk, maternity risk, work injury, sickness, and death of breadwinner risk. And then the idea is really to ensure that no one would fall below the poverty line. If a system is already in place to come in and provide the buffer when the risk is materialized. And this is something that I just want to highlight again to you. As I mentioned just now, while Malaysia have made a significant progress in building up our social protection system, but coverage in terms of the adequacy of social protections and adequacy of the benefit also remain a serious problem. For example, adequacy of old age saving is worrying, while social protection for children is limited to the poor only. And even within this poor that we try to target, there are still a significant number who are not given the appropriate assistance in this regards, probably due to fiscal constraints. So this somehow resulted in these missing middle issues that you can see across this life cycle. We have these people who are in the middle, probably they are vulnerable as well, but yet due to the definition of poverty or eligibility criteria that we have adopted, probably they somehow left out from the system. So now I would like to so just now I highlighted that we still have some issue in providing social protection that cover the idiosyncratic risk, but now it has become more challenging because it is expected that we'll be more prone moving forward to with a covariate shock. And then this is where I think I would like to argue that shock responsive can be built upon existing social protection. In fact, we should be doing that rather than taking the initiative that try to address natural disaster or humanitarian assistance outside our social protection system, because later on we'll see that it will be more effective, efficient, as well as we will be more ready if this kind of intervention is integrated within our social protection system. So what does it mean by a shock responsive social protection system? So it is a system that incorporates disaster risk consideration in its design so that it can respond flexibly in times of crisis. So we're looking at really in terms of crisis, how we can come in to extend assistance using the existing infrastructure and registry or system that we already have. And so now I would like to talk a bit on how we can adapt our existing social protection to respond to shock. And if you look at this chart, this is based on the Oxford Policy Management that outline how government can adapt their existing system to respond to shock. The first to do is to design tweak, i.e. Adjusting the design of routine social protection intervention by taking into consideration the crisis that a country typically faces. For example, in this context, recently probably you may want to take the EPF system, EPF withdrawal, that we try to tweak slightly the withdrawal condition to also Although yeah, there are some debates on that, but this can be an example of tweaking the system designs. And then secondly, piggybacking is when we use the existing programs infrastructure to respond to a disaster but manage separately, or we use other administrative system to put in place a system program. For example, during the COVID, I think this is one example that can be relevant is our wage subsidy program that leverage on social SOCSO's registry. And thirdly, vertical expansion, where we temporarily increase the benefit value or duration of benefit for all or some of the existing recipient. Example can be the Bantuan Prihatin that the government increased the benefit. And thirdly, also horizontal expansion, where we broaden the eligibility, and during COVID, somehow government extend the assistance to the M40 group as well. So we can see that there have been a lot of response being given attention by the government, and I think they have come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, around 8 similar packages totaling about 530 billion. I mean, there are discussion around this in terms of how some people are still left vulnerable, but to be fair, a lot of the assistance are relevant and have been helpful, as for example in terms of addressing unemployment issues. I think wage subsidy have been something that have proven that have relevancy in the context of pandemic management of pandemic. And finally, I just want to briefly go to the challenges that could be associated with realizing shock responsive social protection system. Firstly, I want to go back to the poverty targeting approach that I mentioned earlier. If we have poverty targeted as a basis of the social protection system, these actually tend to cover a subset of the poor of any society. So when we have a COVID shock, there will be a larger population that need assistance. The problem is the targeted people may not be the same as those affected by the disaster. Hence, this can be a challenge if our social protection is not broad enough. Okay, that's the first challenge. And secondly, it can be this is also can be a limitation if the social protection system is not comprehensive, because it can be path dependent, because due to difficulty of rapid new program development implementation during a crisis, response option could be primarily confined to the instrument and coverage of the existing group only. So we are not able to reach those are really in needs, and expanding this existing poverty targeting may overwhelm the system, and we risk the excluding the people who are really affected by the disaster, natural hazard, economic and climate risk. And in the absence of a matured social protection system, Malaysia have the system I mentioned just now, but there are some gaps and coverage issue. But what lesson that we learn from the crisis is that if the system is not mature, it is a challenge to provide a shock responsive assistance, because a shock responsive social protection system built on the existing system. If the existing system is weak, so it can be difficult to scale up any intervention program. So So if a system is not comprehensive, horizontal and vertical expansion can be overwhelmed. And if there is no system that can be a range of actors trying to respond to the crisis, and coordination can be very challenging. And piggybacking design tweaks sounds straightforward, but it relies on admin capacity to really deploy the initiative. So when we don't have a system already in place, we may have limited financial resources because we are not fully, we don't expect ahead in terms of financial requirement that we need to plan ahead. So this is really an issue because after all, response are constrained by the amount of money available. But I think shock responsive social protection can really be an element, opportunity that really can drive change and really can challenge some stigma or old thinking that we have in terms of the role of social protection, and hence why we need to continue advocate to build a long-lasting system that Prof mentioned just now, future-proof or shock-ready, rather than limit ourselves into short-term reliefs, which is not sustainable. So I just want to finish my presentation by just read this quote by Tandika McGuire, who have passed away a few years ago. He said that social policy must be designed not only residually, but to cater for social casualty, but also integrated as a central component of policy to ensure the withdrawal of their sustainability. More specifically, social policy must not confine itself to only social inclusion, but must also directly address the issue of economic development and the consolidation of the democratic order. So with that, I end my presentation for now, Prof. I over to you back, Prof.
Thank you, Hawati. It is indeed, in terms of concept and in terms of framework, I think Khazanah Research Institute had, I think, well ahead of the other research house or even the public university. I think your presentation really give us a good opening ground for a lot of discussion later on. I would like to call upon Dr.Vivi Alatas, who have just joined us. I think she's struggling to get the line now. Can you bear with us a little bit? I think she's from Jakarta, so I think I believe the line is doing well for the moment. Just give her a little bit of time to join us. I think she's all right. She's on now. Assalamualaikum, Dr.Vivi Alatas. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for be able to join us despite your schedule and whatnot. I think without further ado, may I allow you to take the virtual restroom, Dr. Vivi Alatas? The floor are all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Fatima. Let me try to share my screen. Hold on for a second. Just a second. Can you see my screen?
It's on, Dr. Vivi.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. It is always an honor to meet with friends from Kuala Lumpur, even though it's virtually. What I would like to talk today is the urgency to establish comprehensive adaptable and responsive social protection system for any country, not only Indonesia, not only Malaysia, for any country. COVID-19 pandemic is the major unprecedented event. It happens everywhere. Everyone are vulnerable. Up until now, if we look at the data from World Odometer, we find that 529 million cases. The death is 6.3 million. Alhamdulillah, the curve is flattening. But if we look at the daily cases, it is still up to 1 million per day. So it is not over yet. COVID is indeed a double malady. If we look in terms of like in Indonesia cases, Indonesia experienced, for example, last year, drastic increase in the spike of cases right after Idul Fitri. The number of deaths is around 156,000. And it is actually an underestimated. WHO study indicated that the excess death in Indonesia is up to 7 times than the number of deaths. So we need to ensure that these types of pandemic will not happen again in the future. Pandemic has also negative effect from some health issues. For example, some of like the data that collected last year indicated 17% respondents experienced increase in at least one household conflict during the pandemic. 64% respondents experienced increase in at least one health issues during the pandemic. If we look in terms of the types of like anxiety, sleep deprivation, headache, depression, it is a real cases phenomena. That country, I think it's not only Indonesia, we need to address that. Of course, it is not only health impact, the economic impact is also real. If we look, 3 out of 4 face reduced income. 1 in 2 half of the families household have no saving, and 9 in 10 family business were hit. The main lessons from COVID is this crisis has brought social protections to the forefront as a crisis response tool. IPCIG, International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth, collected data of interventions and programs from all over countries, and most of the programs were cash transfer. COVID-19 indeed providing renewed interest and impetus to ensure that social protections becomes the forefront policy for each country. But of course, there are a lot of things that we need to learn, to improve, to ensure that we can protect our own citizens. For Indonesia cases, for example, the government do increase the social protections allocation from 0.8% of GDP to around 1.5%, with the total budget in 2020, 222.3 trillion, and like slightly decreased quite substantially in 2021 with kind of allocation, the similar kind of allocation of cash transfers and other type of program. COVID-19 is a wake-up call, recognition of the necessity and value of social protection in its 2 dimensions, not only providing income security, but also access to quality healthcare. The crisis also taught us that with political will, as well as solidarity at the national and international level, countries can make social protections a reality. But it also saw us expose the social protection gaps and limitations. Each country needs to address those gaps to ensure that whatever happens in the future, country can reach and help its own vulnerable populations. The challenge is now to transform emergency responses into sustainable social protection systems. We need to learn quite a lot of things: evidence of policy, implementation, and crisis response effect. What do we know about the effectiveness of those social action programs? What are the enablers and bottlenecks to effective crisis response? What are the implications for social protections in the longer terms, and the emerging lessons and recommendations? But of course, it is not easy. Each country face challenges. The challenge is to protect vulnerable families from health disasters and economic shocks. Even before the COVID-19, the challenge is already enormous and continue to be enormous. Only, for example, 26% of children and families in the world are covered. Only 45% of mothers with newborn receive a maternity benefit. There were plenty of homeworks even before the crisis. In Indonesia cases, for example, bencana adalah pabrik kemiskinan. Let's see, within the last decade before pandemic, there were 18,000 small and large disasters in various parts of the country, with 6,000 fatalities and up to $16 million of the poor for each with 50% of the poor for each year being new poor. The vulnerable households were not just only the poor. While I was still at the bank, we conducted study trying to look in terms of like aspiring middle class and class. We defined the distribution of consumption classes based on risk of a vulnerable household. It has a chance of more than 10% to return to poverty. An aspiring middle class household is not poor, but still has a risk of more than 10% to become vulnerable, and a middle class household has less than 10% risk of being vulnerable. Majority of Indonesian citizens are in aspiring middle class, not yet becoming middle class. And people do exit and enter middle class. It is not easy to climb up the ladder. Within 14 years, almost half the aspiring middle class remain. 26% become middle class, 24% become vulnerable households. So COVID pandemic crisis makes anyone vulnerable to not being able to climb up the ladder. Crisis also expose the gaps in existing social protection system. The effectiveness of crisis response depends on ability to reach the right household with the right benefit at the right time. While some social protection measures were announced and delivered in timely manners alongside, shortly after the lockdown's declaration, for example, others took months to start roll out, and with different coverage, with different adequacy of support, and with still a lot of like population affected, not really being able to receive some of the assistance, and especially women, informal workers, urban poor dwellers, refugees, and others. The benefits is also not enough. Some of the recipients felt the amount of benefit was too small. When people were asked whether the benefits were enough, most people in Indonesia answered partial. Indeed, some of the program is like the benefit is around 25% of poverty line for several months. Of course, it is a dilemma between given adequate benefit versus expanding coverage, especially when tax revenues were declining. So the challenge of like having a targeting mechanisms when you do not have enough spending, enough budgets to cover everyone is another challenge. In Indonesia cases, there has been improvement in overall targeting. Over time, the central and local government combined various methods and data to target the beneficiary, but it took time. Only after almost 1 year, we have some kind of like 90% of the bottom 40% receive some kind of help. But of course, as we see from previous slide, it is not enough, and it's only for certain months. And if we look in more detail for each program, there are significant exclusion error for some program. For example, some of the cash transfer for the extreme poor, only about 40% of the bottom 20 get it. This is the conditional cash transfer program. The other challenge is inducing crucial behavior. Of course, we know the primary weapon in dealing with COVID is ensuring behavior change and compliance of using masks, keeping distance, avoiding crowd, mobility restrictions. But as you see in here, this is an example of like non-compliance in keeping a distance and reducing mobility. Even when around the Delta peak, we see quite a lot of crowding behavior happens, especially in markets. And last year, Idul Fitri, we also saw like quite a numbers of like what happened is like they went back to their kampung before the ban was enforced. We can see from these pictures, there are some protocols about religious gathering, again with significant non-compliance. Why people misbehave? Why are people not willing to comply with critical behaviors? Why do people misbehave? There are many possible reasons. The economics needs, the cognitive bias, hawks, and lack of knowledge, lack of credible threats is another. Indeed, hawks is like another something that I don't think it's only Indonesia. During the COVID, at some point, the government identified there is 197 type of hawks that happen from about the vaccine, all other types of hawks. So addressing hawks is an important but also a wicked heart problem here. How to ensure countries are better prepared for future crises? There is an urgent need of adaptive social protection. When designed appropriately, social protection programs can deliver to the poorest and most vulnerable households. The important here is having a strengthening overall protection programs, not only designing programs for coping with the shocks, but also adapting, preparing, and also preventing the shocks itself. So there are 4 components of adaptive social protections: having the right programs, having the right data and informations, and having enough financings, but also at the same, most importantly, is institutional arrangement and partnership to ensure effective implementations. The future of social assistance system should also be assessed by the event to which it's comprehensive. What I meant by comprehensive is the ability to have a mix of programs, provide the full range of social assistance functions. These include immediate impact on reducing poverty and inequality along the life cycle, enable households to make better investment for future generations, helps government make reforms and support growth, protects people from falling into poverty, and activating beneficiaries to transition into productive livelihoods. There is a need to establish a systems with the ability to expand flexibility and scalability. What I mean by there is a need to be able to have vertical expansion, to add additional benefit amount, and also to horizontal expansions to increase the number of beneficiaries. Indeed, if we look at the data that collected by IPCIG, most of them actually focus on coverage expansions only, most of the programs, less on vertical expansion only, let alone those who did both coverage and vertical expansions. And again, cash transfer is the prominent choice of programs with different, and also like for subsidies, we also see quite a lot of like the number of type of subsidies, public utility, deferral of payment, rent, and other subsidies. For the future, if we want to ensure that every country has ability to have and reach their own vulnerable household, there is a need to ensure like comprehensive services and programs. This is like one of like the new books of the government, shows like the variety of social protections that needs to be there and linked to the social registries. And if we look, a lot of the countries, like some countries have all kind of this program, for example, Chile, but a lot of the other countries, there are still remaining homework to be prepared. Then the other important one is actually helping beneficiaries transition into productive employment. We need to ensure that there is work incentive measures, employment support programs, skill training, and job search assistance are another components of a comprehensive social protection program. Of course, the importance of data and information, both in terms of targeting, early warning system, but also assessment of post-shock needs. As we already know, it is difficult to transform targeting systems in Indonesia cases or in Malaysia cases, complex targeting environment, 18,000 island, part dependencies of like previous programs. And the most difficult one is getting buy-in from all stakeholders. Indeed, if we look in terms of the type of programs in the world, most of them, 60%, are universal because, of course, like COVID happens almost for all. Like the one that becomes vulnerable was not just the poor. The other need is the need for early warning system. If we look, as we saw earlier, shocks happen, whatever kind of shocks. There is a need to have a monitoring system based on robust analytical framework and key indicators to identify the need of preparing for future shocks. With this monitoring and evaluations systems need to be developed with predetermined threshold and trigger periods, and the trigger should be sensitive enough to initiate response during crisis, but not so sensitive that measures would turn on too easily. And it should be translated into the decision-making process, legal framework set in the beginning to avoid delays in practice. What happened is that the delays in legal frameworks make a country unable to act as quick as possible. And also identifying the budget and set the amount of response, the type of programs that's needed, monitor the implementation, and turn off the response when it's needed. Of course, it's all depend on the financing needs. Each country needs to have an estimated cost associated with response to shocks, pre-plan financial and other risks, linked to disbursements mechanism, and securing long-term financing to support a higher resilience. If we look in terms of like the type of financing sources, mostly comes from public, around only 40% comes from international, and only around 8% comes from private, or so, and 5% from social security. The last components of an adaptive social protection, comprehensive social protection program is the institutional and arrangement and partnership. There is an important to ensure government leaderships, comprehensive policy and collaboration between sectors and among actors, ensuring institutional capacity. Any effective social system consists of three well-articulated components: the policy, the programs, and the local delivery. There are challenges in each of these levels. For example, the importance of having planning and coordination under one centralized roof is the starting point for an integrated social assistance system, with the following functions: overall program and policy management, coordination across central institutions, setting up common platforms, and allocation of resources. It will be great if I can learn a lot also from the Malaysia experience in terms of like defining the policies, planning, and coordinations of social protections. These one roof coordinations have a lot of function across all programs with common platforms needed, for example, on socialization, including addressing all those behavioral programs, targeting issue, identification, payment mechanism, but also important in terms of control and audit, complaints and grievance, and monitoring and evaluation. It is a wicked hard problems. We need to rely on evidence-based policy making. Complaints and grievances is another important one, which is very much lacking in certain countries, including Indonesia. Mechanisms to handle appeals and grievances are something that we need to ensure we have. But of course, the other issues is like the importance of role of local government. Local government have a lot of key roles in providing basic services, assisting the implementation of social and complementing the social assistance program with local programs. But there are problems, especially on capacities, on the quality and quantity of local services varies across local government. There are some lessons learned in terms of like the addressing principal agents dilemma with providing autonomous regions sign a joint management, for example, ensuring assessing the quality of implementation, providing performance-based financial incentive, and also a regional capacity in terms of like addressing these things. Yeah. So those are the 4 things that we need to ensure each country has to ensure that we will be able to reach, each country will be able to reach their own poors whenever, whatever happens in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vivi Alatas, for the presentation. I'm sure the crowd later on will be glad to ask you the question on some of the things that you have presented. Now, let me just do a reverse type of protocol here. I would like to get back to Dr. Haniza earlier on for the second round of the question and answers. I think on your screen there will be quite a lot of questions already. Dr. Haniza, I know that you have not presented your second part. I think if we can do it in a Q&A session. Now, let me just ask you a very basic question here. I mean, the buying in for multidimensional poverty index has been slow as far as Malaysia is concerned. I know the resistance in terms of how to measure and what to measure. Now, in such difficulty and in such resistance, will the blending in between SDG goals and MPI be the way out in order to make the government to adopt to the measure, and yet at the same time we are able to see the implementation and the execution and the operation of SGI, especially objective number 1, to be on a faster, to ride on a faster lane. Will that be possible? I mean, in MPI is not been taught as one option. So can it be implemented together with the SDG goals that we have already adopted? Question to you, Dr. Haniza.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. The question of buy-in, I think there are a number of components to your question, which I will try to address. The question of buy-in. To be honest, between PLI and MPI, the issue is maybe complexity between the 2 measures, right? PLI is, yes, MPI is much more complex. It has got a number of dimensions and so on. But for policymakers, MPI has less policy making or accountability impact measures. Yeah? So this paradigm shift that we need is to be able to remove the word accountability. I mean, accountability must be there, but to go forward looking that we have this data, this is the fact on the ground. Let's take this baseline and show that whatever we are doing as a country, as a set of policymakers or frameworks and strategies, will change what will be the MPI in 10 years from now, for instance. This approach has been taken by countries like Colombia, by India. They started with a very, very bad baseline MPI, and they are not shy to publish it. Yeah? But over a decade, we can see improvements overall of the MPI. We can see where the improvements, and we can also see which dimension has improved compared to the other dimensions. And this has been a success story that the government was proud of. Look, this is what I've done. They've got all maps, dashboards, and everything just to show MPI by locality, by dimension, by indicator, and all that. To show that, yes, it took us 5 years, it took us 10 years, which we can, in Malaysia's case, we can easily fit into the 12 Malaysian plan, 13 Malaysian plan, and so on, right? So it's a powerful tool to say that we are doing the right thing, rather than not using it to see where we are now and what we could do better. So, and there's no one department or one agency that will be made the scapegoat, because as we mentioned, it is impact of any SDG goals, whether education, whatever, is a culmination of efforts by different agencies, by different people, but not as a whole of society. It's a whole of a society responsibility. Yeah, it's a whole of a society responsibility, not just a government agency. And this is a chance for us to honestly clean our house, for instance, at the local level, at the federal level, at the financing side, at the community participation side, on the data registry side. Hawati and I, we talked a lot about social registries, the importance of breaking the silos, just in terms of database of the poor, the social database, the beneficiary database. So that social protection, when it is needed, it can be easily expanded, it can be easily mobilized, galvanized, whatever word we want to use it, without revamping, without reinventing the wheel, without doing anything that's even more costly than, the crisis that we want to tackle. So buy-in, yes, Prof, to be that is the first thing, right? Buy-in, knowing how to use it, really wanting to use it, and not for political gains, but mostly to show that development trajectory is there. And I think Malaysia has got a lot of potential to, to show more to the population and also to the world. The link to SDGs, yes, as I've shown in my slides, they are linked to not just the SDG on poverty, but also SDG on other things, SDG on education, on inequality, on even urban planning, because many of the MPI indicators are related to decent or standard living, basic consumption basket. So planning of the SDGs, it is at the moment we have a big project on setting out the SDG roadmap to complement the 12 Malaysia plan. Yeah, so we can map it down to the indicators. There are 169 indicators. So the 169 indicators will be more specific. Under goal 1, you have 1, and under goal 2, you have 3, 4, it will be more specific. What are the dimensions in there that contributes to the SDG goal? So this 169 can also be a pool of indicators that we can bring into the MPI if we want to. It's already there. The list is already there, 169. So once we prioritize and we see that, okay, we can pick. We don't really have to start from scratch, but we are open, whatever suits the country. And nothing is legal as far as the SDG is concerned. The third part is, I will refer back to many of the speakers mentioned just now, SDG localization. MPI has very little use if it remains MPI, PLI, you name it. It will have very little use if it remains as a national aggregate statistic. Not every district has to create its own MPI measures, but I mean that's welcome. As I said, there are unique nuances that probably we can pick up when we have a localized MPI even. But generally, even the national MPI, once it is set properly, it can unveil a lot of strategic investment opportunities, policy making opportunities, community involvement opportunities, and this is really where the guiding what we say, the action on SDG localization can pick up from. And measures like MPI, HDI, whatever measures we have are flexible enough. It's about instruments being neutral, but for us to use them and to act upon them and to stand by them. We cannot deny the results. If the results is ABC, we have to say it is ABC, right? But we are going towards so definitely, I would conclude that with COVID, with environmental challenges, a matrix of poverty that grows with us, reflect our contemporary challenges as well as future challenges well. And then the next part is used well. Not everybody needs to be involved in the creation of the MPI, but used well as a whole society, strategy that will be, at a whole society strategy at the federal level, at the local level, even at the PBD level, that will be really, really awesome. That will be really, really great. I hope I've answered your question, Prof.
Thanks.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I
Okay.
personally will look forward to the marriage between MPI and SDG. To me, that is a marriage made in heaven, sort of things, you know, a way forward. Okay, some of our discussion come back to the area of social protection. Let me move over to Hawati on this regard, right? On the area on building of social protection, if we believe that there is a good measure in place. So let me get to Hawati before I get to Dr. Vivi Alatas. Now, as an economist, we have a very much what I consider as love-hate relationship with the market. The market on one hand is an evil, on the other hand, it enables a lot of system, right? Now, as far as designing the social protection policies, Hawati, now how much of this market, the strength of it can be built in? Because we talk about social protection or social insurance and all that to protect the vulnerable. Without the market mechanism, it will not be sustainable. So how do we redesign the market? How do we sort of reforms, market reform that is needed to make sure that the social protection program that we have can be put into place? Any idea on that, Hawati?
Thanks, Prof. So now is this contestation between the role of the government and the role of private sector. So I think I'm not totally socialist that want to promote or to advocate total intervention, government intervention in all aspects of our life. I believe that there are roles that government have to play, and there are roles that private sector can play. And at the same time, I also believe that there is a role that civil society can play as well. But the problem, I think, okay, this is my opinion, that we in playing up this role, we somehow have our focus or our approach having a bit convoluted. In the sense that where we think that a government should play its role, where the private sector should come in, and where civil society should come in as well. So I mean, so this is where my line of thinking is that the one that we are trying to advocate is in terms of the social protection floor, the really basic standard of living that everyone should be covered or being protected from. I think that should be the role of the government. I mean, we can actually debate on how this government can undertake this initiative sustainably. For us, there are certain things that we think that it should be fully tax financed, coming from the tax revenue. But at the same time, we can also adopt this what we call this earmark fund or solidarity approach among the tripartite arrangement between, for example, the employer, employee, as well as the government, how they can be more efficient in terms of the allocation of resources, but at the same time, we still need the government to actually provide some kind of subsidy where we try to adopt this the model of social insurance or social security. And in this regards, I somehow believe that this responsibility should fall under the purview of the government, but I mean, at least for the basic level of protection, and private sector can come in to top up again beyond that basic level. And this is where, for example, if you are talking about health insurance, the private sector can play a lot of role in terms of providing a slightly more decent or even better protection in terms of their product offering for social health insurance. But at least if you want to really build a strong system that is inclusive and at the same time shock responsive, I believe that a lot of this flaw need to be think of by the government. That's one. And secondly, now I want to go a bit get a bit in terms of the role of our civil society. I think we all acknowledge that we are a caring society, and if you look at the effort being done by our NGOs during COVID, during the recent flood disaster, we should applaud their initiative. But I want to provoke our thinking whether is this really a failure of a government or really something that that we want, a model that we want to pursue moving forward. I think there is no harm that trying to encourage the role of civil society to play their role during times of crisis, but it also signifies that I am trying to provoke here whether it signifies a trust issue of our population on the government, and hence why our society have to be more responsive of taking each other during times of crisis, which I don't think if that is the case, it is a really good indicator, good signs of our social cohesion and solidarity in our society. So that probably my response, Prof.
Thank you. Yeah, I do agree on the same line. It has to be the community at large, which is part of the solution as well. Now, as an extension of that, Dr. Vivi Alatas, you did mention that the COVID is still there, but of course, the next pandemic is no longer a hypothetical. It can strike anytime, as what we have seen in the past 2 years. Dr. Vivi, I mean, I've yet to sort of, maybe we can share. I mean, in Indonesia, given your political stability, given the good governance, and given the good record in terms of GDP that you have achieved during the recovery period, is it possible to have a quick fix to the whole problem? Right? I mean, you have the good climate, the good condition, the appropriate condition to address to this problem. So is there a possibility of giving it a good fix in terms of the recovery from COVID, given the fact that you have the political stability, strong governance, and also the strong growth in terms of economic performance? What is your take on that?
Of course, like the first thing is like the grass is always greener on the other side. We have still a lot of problems, yeah. But I think the most important thing is actually ensuring that we do learn. Indonesia, like for example, there are quite a numbers of lessons learned that, for example, like some of the programs have previously we haven't been using a lot on this digital technology, because of like the COVID, like within like a short time, Indonesia has to do some kind of reaching to their poor. And for example, there is this program of providing training to anyone, an on-demand application systems where everyone can apply to get voucher for trainings. But there are still a lot of homework that Indonesia needs to do, including like this, the targeting that mentions by Dr. Hawani before. Indonesia react too slow, too late in terms of like, because of the data problem, because the data was 2015, it's not up to date, a lot of people were not there, exclusion error, that's another issue. And I think that the one important ways, and I think on-demand applications needs to be there anytime. This is my sense, like there is always a debate between should you do universal versus targeted. On-demand applications is one way of like coming in the middle to ensure like ability to vertical expansions and horizontal expansions also when needed. That's one lessons. The other lessons from Indonesia is actually the importance of local clinic, the importance of ensuring addressing regional disparities of capacity for local clinics to address, because if you go to the hospital, it will be too late. And the number of hospitals is not enough with this kind of influx of huge victims. Ability local clinics to be the front of addressing the first needs is an important one. But the other important issues that I think Indonesia actually being helped a lot is the social capital, the capacity for coordinated actions at the kampung level, at the local level, using WhatsApp group, in ensuring people understands what need to be done. Because a lot of the times, like you see, like there are the excess death is 7 times at the numbers of death. It's because people do not know what need to be done, or people have some kind of conspiracy theory beliefs about vaccine, about other things, and the one that they trust most is within their community. And there are a lot of like positive deviant stories of this social capital. For example, in Yogyakarta, it was amazing the way people were helping each other just through WhatsApp group in terms of addressing both like ensuring like shelters are being done by the communities, and also improving addressing ability to target digital like selling through digital platform, creating platform for small industry, micro industries, and also addressing the need of like inducing willingness to be vaccinated. It's all come a lot from the social community. And I think that going forward, social protection is not just about ensuring government do all the homework in terms of like helping like the one that I just presented, but also the social contract for the community to be willing to put their not only their money, but also their time and also their thinking to be part of the society. Because usually, if we want to ensure like we can protect people, we can ensure people do what they need to do as early as possible in addressing the shocks, it starts from the lowest level of the community.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vivi. I mean, I do agree with you. Any development effort must be from the base to the top. Yeah. I mean, that is the model that we have in the textbook, but not easily translated. Exactly. Not easily translated over the years. That's why I keep telling my colleague at the department, maybe we are teaching the wrong thing here. It's just top bottom type of things, you know. With COVID, we are forced to change. Okay, let me look at the chat box here. Is there anything addressed to the specific panelists? There's one question, but I believe this is a bit localized in terms of the question. Can Dr. Haniza or Hawati address to it? Florence, quick, in terms of what can be done to help a community in Kuala Lumpur. Do you want to address to that, Dr. Haniza? There's a question on the chat screen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Florence. This is indeed a good example of on the ground vulnerabilities that we are seeing more and more during COVID, and even now. Even now, there are families that where the children cannot go to school, not just because of the transportation cost, but even, dressing up. One family even said that the children became shy, don't want to go to school because they don't have enough money to buy soap. So these are very real examples. No social protection system is perfect, right? That's one. And I really believe that social protection is just one of the solutions when we have a crisis, a monetary, an income, livelihood crisis as we have today. It is one of the solutions. The other one, I believe, is the public infrastructure. The social infrastructure must also be there. So cash handouts or whatever social protection support, insurance, social insurance, yes, but at the same time, we must also make our social infrastructure, public infrastructure cheap. For example, schools must be good, public transport must be there, must be usable. So, this is a different way of providing, of actually helping with another hand, for instance. One hand giving the support, financial support, but the other hand is giving the access to quality public infrastructure. The third one is, of course, increasing the economic opportunities. So this one must not in any case or in any instance replace the others. The responsibility of the government, investors and all that to bring the economy to grow, whatever happens to grow, that cannot be replaced by a good social protection system. Neither can a social infrastructure replace social protection. These three are not substitutable. So although our focus today is on social protection, yes, these are for people who are almost falling off the edge or have fallen off the edge. We want to pull them up, yes. But the other two is still our responsibility as a nation, foremost, of course, the government. So what happens to this? What can we do for this? At the local level, it is to link them with whatever social protection system. This is obviously the case of families that is at the edge, very vulnerable at the edge or have fallen off the edge into poverty. So one government will say, like, link them up to the social protection system. If we can get access, we can bring them into the system, they will be covered. And there will be a number of incentives that they can benefit from. So this is one response that maybe the government and all that. And of course, we need to mobilize public support as well as the income generation opportunity again. So this can be in the form of small capital loans for them to get started, for the family to get started. For the children to go back to school, just to stand. So it's not just social assistance, but also opportunity. So it could be a loan to buy something else to replace flood motorbikes, flood affected motorbikes or vehicles, to replace machines, So I'm just saying that there's no one type of solution, but it has to be a combination of all. And they are equally important, non-substitutable, and on the ground, it has to be presented clearly on the ground. I mean, the policy can say these three, blah, 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 but when we go and meet this family, what do we offer? I have seen cases, I've been involved in cases where the family will receive 5 visits or 6 visits from different agencies, whereas you only need 1 visit. And you only need 1 copy of IC, 1 copy of the electricity bill to show, that this is your house. You need only 1 copy of Surat Beranak to show that these are your dependents. You don't need 5. That kind. So it starts with the database, the seamless support, and then presenting those options to them. Okay, this is the SME loan that you can take, or this is the education. MOE has got 27, 30 plus programs for B40s, for instance. So how do you access this? Our country, alhamdulillah, is rich in that sense, the variety, and also generosity of the public, as mentioned by other speakers just now. Yes, but I will warn you, the generosity of the public has got its limits, because what we've seen in the previous flood crisis is that only a few unfortunate locations were affected. And what if we have a huge or a massive disaster affecting the whole country, like what happened to Puerto Rico, what happened to other countries, where you cannot rely on the generosity of unaffected Malaysians, like what we have now. So are we going to, are we going to still say that we'll think of it when we will cross the bridge when we come to it? No. At the rate of the climate change that we have today, there are going to be climate refugees. There are going to be the climate poor. People are displaced for a long time. People's income are going to be affected for a long time. Access to education will be changing school, changing, a lot of things that we cannot imagine. And it's not one or two flood that will come. It's huge. So there's changes in, we need to reshape our food production system, for instance, to respond to the climate change, right? Have we started that? Are we going to still say that we'll cross the bridge when we come to it? So there's a lot of work and thinking, and definitely a lot of action that's needed. So thank you again for the question.
Hawati, can I give you 1 minute to address the same thing? Because this is a very localized Malaysian affair for that. Do you want to address it? 1 minute?
No, I think Dr. Haniza have comprehensively addressed. I don't know how much I can add on.
Okay. All right. Okay. There are quite a few comments there. The role of ministry and again, there's a lot of interest in the social protection in terms of making sure that it's sustainable and then it's effective and whatnot. I believe as I scroll down, there's not much more. There's not many there in terms of specific question to any one of you. Now, if I can just do a soft landing to the whole session today. Now, Malaysia and Indonesia's relationship, I would always describe it as hubungan yang panas dan dingin, from time to time. But we still remain a neighbor. We sort of be part of a whole system of values. I mean, of course, we fight over who owns satay, who owns silat, who eat tempe. To me, that's the beauty of this region. Now, I would like to get to the three of you, if I have the time. I mean, the last 5 minutes or so, give the audience a short answer to it. How can we work together? Considering the fact that the magnitude of the crisis in terms of the pandemic, and also the case that climate change risk is going to be something that we're going to face. Now you're talking about a region which is broad and huge and all over. Now, when we talk about how can we work together, it's more of knowledge sharing in form of collaboration. What is the way forward for the three of you? 1 minute each for each panelist. Can we address that? The way forward for the two countries to face calamity in the future. Dr. Vivi, will you want to start first?
I think I agree with you that we need, Malaysia and Indonesia need each other if we want to ensure that we are able to address the growing uncertainties of this world. We need to collaborate. Like one of the best collaborations that we need to do is sharing success stories, sharing positive deviance. This is a wicked problem, really understanding what are the possible positive deviant stories so that it can be replicated. Don't have to start from scratch is one way to do.
Hello? Are you still there? What's wrong with the line? Dr. Haniza, you can you hear me? Hawati, can you hear me? I think we lost Dr. Alatas, Dr. Vivi Alatas. Are you still there?
Can you hear me before?
Yeah, the line.
Obstacle in connection.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Vivi Alatas.
No, I think that's it. What I want to say briefly, which is that sharing positive deviant stories is one. If you ask me for 1 minute's answer, that's like the number one things that we need to learn from each other.
Thank you, Dr. Haniza. Any last statement from you
on the Indonesia-Malaysia relationship? When COVID strike, climate change strike, and whatever geopolitical challenges strike, we suffer together. There's no point of saying like, oh, I'm better than you. At that time, we will both suffer. The whole region will suffer, and it's different from if one country suffers and the others can lend their support, right? But when we are faced with these kind of challenges, when it affects us, we all will be affected. What happens in another country will affect us one way or another, like what's happening in India, in Indonesia is affecting our palm oil, our rice, chicken. So it will come. So then solidarity is of course very important. But solidarity should go beyond just saying that okay, we are good friends, we sympathize with each other and so on. But we need to have what we say, an effective platform to mobilize action. Yeah, because diplomatic relationships is a very tricky process. A lot of negotiation will take place. So when the crisis happens, you don't have time to negotiate. You don't have time to negotiate too long. So an effective collaboration commitment that once this happens, this thing will trigger action, collaborative action or collective action. Therefore, we can support each other. So it must go beyond. We hope it goes beyond the multilateral negotiation into a multilateral platform of action. So that will be, the way forward, because we cannot face all these crises by ourselves. And again, just like what I mentioned just now about flooding and all that, next time, all of us will be affected. It's not just going to be one country, one region in Indonesia or one region in Malaysia. It's going to be all over. So let's have that more honest preparation and assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haniza. Hawati, can I have a take on your?
Okay, I totally agree. When it comes to all these natural disaster, climate change risk, catastrophe at global level, we are all together in this. Hence, cooperation need to be enhanced further. But probably, maybe if I can just take the perspective of economic integration, I think we have to acknowledge that we have a very good symbiosis relationship between Malaysia and Indonesia, particularly in terms of how Indonesia workforce has actually contributed a lot in terms of Malaysia economic development, in really filling up the gaps that we face in terms of workforce. So that's one. And secondly, on the other hand, Malaysia somehow benefited in terms of the market, a massive market that Indonesia have. So this is something. These are two great potential area that we have leverage on, and this is the area that we should continue to work together. And the other one, probably in terms of the supply chain, I know there are a lot of conversation at ASEAN level, trying to make economic integration between ASEAN countries become more closely linked. And this is where I think sharing of innovation, technology, know-how, as well as competency in specific area throughout the supply chain should be enhanced and strengthened. So that would be from me.
Thank you, Hawati. I think we have to accept the fact that the time given to us has come to a stop. But on all fairness and on all the challenges ahead, may Allah protect us as much as we can design some of the things. But deep in us, we know that may the jihad against poverty be part of us. May our willingness, to work together and also to address the problem. I think our Islam has always highlight the question of the need to address poverty within the neighborhood, and then all the other religion as well. I suppose it is never deprived of that. I know I don't have any more from the audience. Now, before I sort of end the session, I must thank the three panelists, Dr.Vivi Alatas, Dr. Haniza, and also Hawati. I do hope that this session has been a good ukhuwah for the three of us, or for the four of us, for all the audience, and to share your work and perspective. On behalf of the Center for Dialogue and Civilization, and also Ungku Aziz Centre, and on behalf of Datuk Professor Dr. Azizan Baharudin, who was not able to be with us in the closing ceremony, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank your participation, and I hope this is not the end. We'll be calling you, be sharing a lot more from you in the near future, because I think the jihad of having knowledge and having to share knowledge is part of what the Ummah need to be in the future in terms of addressing. Thank you very much for it. But before I end, let me, in the typical way, just sell you a pantun, but I don't expect it to be responded because in interest of time. All right, kalau ada sumur di ladang boleh saya menumpang mandi. Kalau ada umur yang panjang boleh kita berjumpa lagi. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum. Bye.
Thank you, Rata.
Thank you, Muhammad.